Yeah, I've just been over to the US, to the International Franchise Association's annual convention. There were about 3,500 people at the convention, mainly from North America, but representatives from 30 other countries around the world, talking all things franchising across all sectors in the franchising space. So yeah, we were just having a conversation before we let everybody in, weren't we, John? And your understanding of franchising as a concept, which is, if you don't mind me saying, fairly limited, and I'm sure you'd admit to that, is not uncommon in the general population. But hopefully today, within the tutors section of the TTA, we'll be able to shed some light on the power of franchising, and how it works, a brief, an overview of how it works, and why it's a great business model to adopt if you want to expand your business in particular. So without further ado, let me just move on to the first slide. So basically, we're going to talk about what franchising is in the tuition sector, how broad it is, how it works, what is franchising as a concept, and also why education is a market, if you like, for the franchising sector. But to start off, just a little bit about me for those who don't know me. My name's Tim Morris. I've been in the franchising sector for I'm going to use the word 4 decades now, because one of my colleagues and well-known personalities within the franchising sector, Farah Rose, used that terminology in Phoenix last week as well. So 4 decades I've been around franchising. I started out in the hospitality industry, working for what I realized once I was working in the industry, for the largest franchisee of the largest hotel franchisor in the world, and that was Holiday Inn. So Holiday Inn still is one of the very, very major hotel brands around the world, which is for the most part operated on a franchise basis. So independent companies own the buildings and operate the hotel, but the hotel is operated under the standards and the brand of Holiday Inn. So I worked for the biggest franchisee for about 15 years. This was in South Africa in the 80s and early 90s, and I was exposed to what franchising is as a business model, and also understand all the other brands which were around me, mainly in the quick service restaurant or bar sectors at that stage. But it gave me, I'd had an inkling and a desire to own my own business, and I realized that franchising was an option to go. So I jumped out of the hospitality industry and I bought into a franchise. I invested in a franchise brand. It was a North American brand, and I knew that I had skills that I'd gained from the hospitality sector that I could transfer to virtually any other business which required high levels of service, and understanding of how the finances of business worked, etc., etc. So I became a franchisee for a brand called Quick Copy, which is a quick print business back in the 90s, just at the beginning of the digital printing and the internet, etc. Anyway, I was a successful franchisee within that brand for 5 years. I sold the business and made a good capital gain on that business. And we transferred. We came over as a family. We came over to the UK. I opened a non-franchise business for a few years in the hospitality sector. And what I found with that was that I had to do everything myself. I had to figure everything out. I had to figure out the marketing plans. I had to design the marketing collateral. I had to figure out what how the business planning worked, etc., which is different to what I'd had when I was a franchisee. And you'll see later on in this presentation, a lot of the business model when I was a franchisee had been provided for me by the franchisor. So running my own business as an independent business owner, whilst it was successful, and again, I was able to sell that business on after a couple of years at a capital gain, it was additional hard work that I had to put in with all those aspects that I've just talked about, which in addition to the day-to-day running and servicing of clients. Once I'd come out of that business, I then became a professional support manager for franchise brands, and ultimately and support people within the franchise sector do exactly what it says on the tin. They support the franchisees within the franchise network to become as successful as they possibly can be. So it's like a business development manager supporting franchisees to become successful. So I worked for a couple of brands before I was approached by Tutors to support the franchisees within the education sector, private one-to-one tuition within the UK. And ultimately, I became the global support director for Tutors across all the 16 countries within which they operated, plus minus 300 franchisees, everywhere from the US and Canada to South Africa, Australia, etc., all over the place. So that's a little bit about me. I now work as an independent consultant to the franchise sector, helping franchisors identify and support their top performing franchisees really achieve their aspirations and what's possible for them as independent business people. So let's move on and look at the other areas. That's all about me. You know a little bit about me. And of course, what I did leave out was when I was working with Tutors, I also became very involved with the Tutors Association, ultimately becoming a board member and then president of the association as well, just prior to John taking over the reins of that role. And I see on the call as well today, I can see that Anna is with us, and I love working with Anna at the TTA as well, who was one of my co-directors when I was on the board. So let's have a look very briefly for people who are not in the franchising space. What is franchising, and specifically what is known as business format franchising? So you'll have heard the term franchise used in many aspects of life. So if you've got the universal franchise, you've got the ability to vote. Franchising in the UK is used very often on the news, referring to our railways, all the brands that operate our railways now are given a franchise to operate on the railway lines. Companies like big global companies like Coca-Cola license manufacturers to manufacture Coke and other of their brands all around the world, and that's known as franchising a manufacturing license. But specifically, franchising that I'm going to be talking about today is known as business format franchising. And the quote that you can see on the screen there, business format franchising is a form of business in which the franchisor provides the franchisee with the right to use its trademark, its brand, its business system, a comprehensive package of support services, ongoing assistance, and a complete set of guidelines and standards for operating that business. So the franchisor is the brand owner. They're the people who have developed the the business model. They have developed all the systems. They've developed all the support packages, the marketing collateral, everything around that business, and they've proven that that business model works. And then they create that into a franchise brand for other people to use that business model, who are known as the franchisees. So why is tuition so well suited to franchising? Well, it didn't take me long to realize when I joined Tutor Doctor, and especially the expansion of the brand across the world, that every single government across the world struggles to provide the correct education framework which suits, and the key word here is all students. We know that, all of us who are involved in the private tuition sector, we're always talking about the gaps that students have, and in the majority of cases it's not their fault, and there can be many reasons for those gaps appearing. The challenge that governments have is providing enough funds and the correct framework and the correct methodologies to deliver appropriate education to all students. And ultimately, what that results in is mediocre results for most students, who, if they'd have had the correct interventions, would have achieved so much more. And therefore, private tuition, which we know, and we're just starting to really get out of this now, was seen as very elitist in the past, is now across all demographic groups, for all reasons. It helps thousands and thousands and thousands of students to fill those gaps that they have while they're in the mainstream schooling system. So we all know that, all of us who are on this call and anybody who's involved in tuition, that private tuition is definitely not elitist. What it is a quality supplemental education opportunity for students across all demographics, to help them achieve the best possible results that they can. And this is why franchising is suited so much to private tuition, because the expansion of individual brands can be made relatively simple through the franchising model to expand across an entire country, and indeed internationally, which we'll see in a slide or so, exactly how that manifests itself. So tuition is ideal for franchising. It really is. So why would somebody in the education sector want to become a franchisor? What are the benefits? The biggest benefit is for a founder, somebody who starts a business off and realizes that it's filling a really good gap within the marketplace, and it's also very successful financially. The founder wants to expand. Now, if you do that on your own, these are relatively small businesses. If you do, as a founder, if you do that on your own, you've got to throw in a significant amount of additional capital if you're going to expand to what are known as bricks and mortar offices around the country. So there's a significantly reduced requirement for expansion if you become a franchisor and you use franchisees to as the investment vehicles, the local investment vehicles, local franchisees investing in your brand, and that can make the expansion of the brand, or it will make the expansion of the brand, much more cost effective for the franchisor. It also helps with localized market knowledge. So franchisees in situ in a local territory, in a local area, know their community, they know the demographics of that community, they understand the marketplace. Now, whereas the general the general delivery of the service will be identical from one part of the country to the other, there will be local nuances which will make a difference. So, for example, in tuition, it could be the price point at which people will accept the tuition. It could be the subjects which are being taught. It could be the number of kids within a local territory which are beneficiaries of pupil premium within a school. Those local nuances can change from territory to territory. Local people, as a franchisee, will have greater knowledge and access to understanding the demographics of a local area. It's certainly, for a franchisor, using the franchise model can certainly help for fairly rapid expansion. And if I could, illustrate that, many brands within franchising, whether it be education or any other brand or any other sector, generally can expand their business model by between 10 and 15, maybe 20 locations a year. The general rule of thumb is between 8 and 12 new franchise a year, which is a significant growth for any brand. There's also, excuse the spelling mistake on this next point, I do apologize. I should have really checked that, being on a tuition and education seminar. I really should have checked this, but there's an opportunity to enter regional markets as well. And I've got two markets as well on there. So again, I do apologize. It does help to operate, for you to be able to operate in regional markets. Even within the UK, it is slightly different to operate in the north of England than it is in the south of England, especially in the northeast. Scotland is different, especially in the education sector. And of course, if you go over to Northern Ireland, there can be cultural differences as well. So for a franchisor using local franchisees, the opportunity to enter regional markets becomes easier. And that also helps with expanding into international markets as well. The one thing about education is that wherever you are in the world, the results of education, 1 and 1 will always add up to 2. French is always French, English is always English. And so in education, it's relatively easy to expand into international markets. You just have to find a partner or a franchisee or a master license holder within that market who understands any cultural differences or any legal differences that there may be in operating in that market. For example, I remember at Tutor Doctor, we recruited a franchisee for Saudi Arabia. But what we didn't do was factor in terms of the business model, the fact that female tutors were not allowed to drive on their own to their students' homes. So they had to have a driver. So there was a cost uplift in the business just to have the drivers employed to take female tutors around the territory to their students. That made the business model really quite challenging to operate in Saudi. So whilst it's relatively easy to expand internationally, it is very important to understand that international market. It's not so much about the business model itself. It's what the local laws are, what the local culture is, etc. But those are the benefits, or some of the benefits, for the franchisor. And for the franchisee is paying the franchisor a franchise fee. That franchise fee is to tap in to the business model. It's to pay for the model which has been proven over years, all the systems, the processes, the marketing, etc. So the franchisee doesn't have any of that headache to start their business. They pay the franchise fee, and they sign a franchise agreement with the franchisor. They receive initial training for a responsible and ethical franchisor that will be really good quality, extensive training in how to deliver the business model. The franchisee will have all of the business systems in place, including the customer relationship management systems, CRMs. The franchisor also spends a lot of time, which many franchisees don't fully understand right at the beginning of their relationship with a franchisor. Franchisors will be spending a lot of time, what I call future-proofing the business, in the background, always looking for what's going to be the next step ahead. So at the moment, we all know about AI, we all know about ChatGPT, and you know what that's sort of looking like. The vast majority of franchisors will be looking deeply at what AI can do in the future for their business model, and so franchisees don't necessarily have to worry about that. They can carry on operating the business while the franchisor is working in the background, developing new processes, procedures, service delivery options to the franchise for the franchisee to use. A great example of that in the education model, of course, is online tuition. So online tuition, as we know, has skyrocketed in the past few years, especially with during COVID. The education space had no other option but to go online. But prior to that, many of the big brands were already embracing online platforms and finding methodologies to use, marketing to their clients, training their franchisees, and training their tutors as well, who are working for the franchisees, to use online models. So although prior to COVID, online tuition was relatively rare in terms of the total amount of delivery of private tuition, suddenly as COVID hit, online became a big deal. Well, many of the franchise brands were ahead of the game because the franchisors had been doing lots and lots of work with online platforms and getting their franchise brands ready to really utilize the technology. And that, of course, remains in place today. Online's become the very, very commonplace within the private tuition sector. So franchisors, whether they're one-to-one, whether they're group learning, for example, learning centers, the franchisors will always be looking at what the future looks like. An additional benefit for franchisees, of course, is they're improving capital value of their business. Many franchisees, again, at the beginning of the relationship between franchisor and franchisee, don't fully realize, although it's becoming more commonplace now as franchisors really start to talk to their franchisees right at the very beginning of the relationship about them exiting the business. Their business gains a capital value, and it can be sold on, whether it's sold on because of retirement or because they want to go on to bigger and greater things, or it might just be personal circumstances that they need to move on from their business. The business, if it's run well, if it's providing the profit base that's needed, it will have a capital value to sell to other interested parties. And of course, as the network grows, the brand becomes powerful. It becomes well known in the marketplace. It does take a while for that to happen, but of course, the more franchisees you get, the more people talk about the brand in the marketplace, the more power it has within its brand visuals, on both online and offline. And also for a franchisee, franchisees are very often relatively small business people who don't get deep into data and benchmarking within their business. The franchisor will, in the majority of cases, be sucking in data from each of the individual businesses through the CRMs, crunching those numbers and being able to provide really powerful benchmarking figures and data and dashboards back to the franchisee to help them optimize their business in terms of their cost structure, their marketing activities, their profit levels, so many different aspects of their business can be modeled by the franchisor as the franchisee just carries on their daily work, which is the CRM is the provider of all the data, which turns into data analysis and benchmarking. So, of course, you might be wondering, well, how big is this sector, especially in the UK? Well, here's some of the brands that are currently operating in the UK in the private tuition market. Some of them you'll know, and I know we've got John Preston on the call today from Mathnasium. We've got Anna, who I mentioned earlier on, who used to be involved in Kip McGrath. I used to be involved in Tutor Doctor. Kumon's a really interesting brand. I'm sure we all know Kumon, but did everybody know that Kumon is, well, the last time that I looked, they were the third biggest franchise brand in the UK, behind McDonald's and Subway. Now, they are all small businesses, but Kumon is a very, very big brand, and supporting tens of thousands of students every week in their math, primarily their maths support. But some other brands, of course, down here: Mathnasium, Magical Maths, Magic Cats, Mad Science, which is a Canadian brand, The Reading Doctor, First Class Learning, etc. Kip McGrath is out of Australia. Mathnasium is out of the United States. Tutor Doctor is out of Canada. Magic Cats is local. Magical Maths is local, and so on. Code Ninjas is a coding brand as well. So, and First Class Learning has got lots of centres up and down the country, and most of these brands are expanding as we speak. Some of them quicker than others. The Reading Doctor, of course, our very own Deborah Salisbury, who I see online, has just, I don't know whether Debs is on the call today, but Debs opened up her head office, physical head office, only a few days ago. But Deborah specializes in reading for younger students, one-to-one, and in private homes, but also in schools as well. So lots and lots of brands are operating in the private tuition space. I would, at a guess, just going through each of these brands, there's probably 1,500 individual offices across those brands, which you can see on the screen, across the country. So as I say, literally thousands and thousands and thousands of students are being supported by these brands that you can see on the screen at the moment. If you just hop across the pond to the United States, the list is significantly bigger. There are many more brands in the US, and I suspect that some of those brands will be just keeping an eye on what's happening in the UK education sector to see whether there's an opportunity for them to bring their brands into the UK as well. Of course, some of these brands which are UK based here, they could be looking across the pond as well to expand into the US market or other markets across the world. So I'm often asked the question, well, where do you get your franchisees from? Let me tell you, being involved in franchising, it's probably the most common conversation that franchisors have amongst themselves continually. It never changes. And part of that, the reason for that is, and the reason that we're having this conversation today, is that many people still in the marketplace across the space don't quite understand what franchising is, and so either they're not looking to be in business, or if they are looking to be in business, they don't look at franchising as an option. So it is probably the most challenging part of franchising is finding your franchisees, but the key piece of finding your franchisees is first and foremost understanding who your ideal franchisee persona is. If you know who that person is, ideally, you can then understand where that persona is likely to hang out. Are they going to be on Facebook community groups? Are you going to find them when you're standing at the school gate picking up one of your children, and it might be one of the mums at the school gate who will become an ideal franchisee? Are they going to be in a mums and tots class? Are they going to be on LinkedIn? Understanding where your ideal franchisee persona is a really good starting point to find franchisees. Of course, there are also there are companies which have big databases of people who have indicated that they would be looking for a franchise opportunity, maybe not quite right now, but they're on marketing databases. And if franchisors are looking to increase the number of franchisees, they can market their brand to these databases and pick up new inquiries from potential franchisees. And then, of course, there are franchise exhibitions, and that's a great place to start if you're thinking about potentially becoming a franchisee or even looking to franchise your business. So you may have a business at the moment which you think, I've been running this business now for the past 5 or 6 years, 7 years. I think there's an opportunity to franchise it. The franchise shows are a great place to go to, the franchise exhibitions, to talk to professional consultants who can help you understand what you need to do to successfully franchise your business. There's a lot of work to do. You might have built out what is a successful business, but to get it to the point where it is franchisable, that's another leap that has to be taken, which does need professionals to help you understand the landscape of what that looks like. But franchise exhibitions, there are 3 big ones in the UK marketplace. We've just had one recently at London Olympia. There'll be one at London Excel at the beginning of April. There's I think in the region of 250 exhibitors at that show, including international brands. And then there's another show in Birmingham later on in the year. I think it's normally June time. Sometimes June, sometimes it's October. And then another route to finding franchisees is through franchise broker services. These are professionals who work within the franchise sector, who work with particular brands, who find their own inquiries, and they speak to individuals and see how those individuals, whether they match up to particular brands. And if they find a franchisee that matches up specifically to your brand within the education sector, they will forward the franchisee onto the franchisor to have the next steps conversations. There is a franchise finder's fee, and that's how brokers make their income using that type of service. So various methods for finding franchisees. Is it easy finding franchisees? If I said it was, I'd be lying. Do franchisors spend a lot of time looking for franchisees? Yes, they do. It is one of the big pieces of franchising to build the brand out. But once you've got the momentum going within the brand, all of the wheels moving, as I mentioned earlier, you can be increasing your brand size by anything from 8 to 20 new franchisees per annum. So excuse me. So I suppose the key is creating success for franchisees and perpetuating the success of the founder's business model. And that's obviously a key focus of franchisors, is ensuring that their franchisees become successful. Everybody in franchising has to understand that not all franchisees are born equal. Quite often we talk about in franchising that everything within franchising is the same. The brand is the same, the systems are the same, the training is the same, the marketing collateral is the same. The only thing that ends up being different is the individuals who run those franchises, which are the franchisees. That's why in franchising, there's always specialist support required for those franchisees to ensure that they get as close to what the original business model looked like as possible, and hopefully to surpass what the results were of that original business model. And then, of course, not all areas or territories are demographically the same. As I explained earlier, they can be different for very many reasons, and so that can create a difference in success levels between different areas. But understanding those demographical differences helps franchisors and franchisees work together with the support structures to build success. So it could be, where do I go and find additional revenue? Well, for some franchisees in the education sector, if you're working in particular let's take the Northeast, one of the areas to build success is working directly with schools within their pupil premium beneficiaries, because the number of kids receiving pupil premium benefits is significantly higher in the Northeast than it is in other areas of the country. And you even have those differences within London, of course. So different areas can need different focuses by the franchisor, working closely with the franchisee to help create their success. Of course, as I mentioned earlier on, right at the very beginning of the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee is the initial training. Initial training must be really well planned, really well executed, to cover as much of the business model as is possible in a relatively short period of time. It is a huge learning curve very often for franchisees. There's a lot of information that they have to take on board. So the training has to be really well planned. It really has to be well executed. Very importantly, there must be robust and proven marketing strategies that franchisees can tap into. There will be a franchisor generally will have a website, online marketing activities going on, such as Google Ads, etc., etc. They may have strategies within the for social media, etc., etc. But it's really important that franchisees don't rely just on the franchisor to provide the marketing activity. I cannot stress this enough. If you are going to be a franchisee, or you are potentially thinking of franchising your business, it's really important that you have a strong and robust local marketing activity program, which again has been proven to drive not only new inquiries, direct new inquiries from your local marketing, but also drive more traffic to your brand website to create more online inquiries. There quite often is a feeling within the franchisee sector that they don't have to do any marketing because the franchisor does that, and they have the website and etc., etc. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's really important that local franchisees do their own local marketing as well, but the franchisor must have those marketing strategies in place to work with the franchisee to deliver those marketing strategies. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, a big part of creating success is having well-developed and delivered support programs for the ongoing time of the franchise agreement, which these franchise agreements can be between 5 and 10 years long. So they are fairly long agreements with franchisees. The support team that helps franchisees must be really well placed to deliver support programs. But support programs aren't just delivered by one individual. There's also things like annual conferences, regional meetings, ad hoc workshops, online networking groups, newsletters. So much as it can be provided by and should be provided by franchisors to support the ongoing growth of their franchisees. So that brings me to the end of the presentation today. I have put up there, if anybody wants to ask any questions, please do. We do have a couple of franchisors on the call today. They may want to add in some comments as well. Yeah, that's me for today, and I hope you found it very interesting and enlightening. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Tim. Really appreciate it. And it's been, I've certainly found it very interesting and intriguing to see how much franchising goes on, even just in the education sector. I mean, obviously, I'm aware of some of the people who have joined us today, and I think we've seen today a number of people who have joined who haven't necessarily already started on that journey towards franchising, but maybe thinking about it. Happy to take any questions. So first of all, we've got a question from Enzo. Just to double check, can you franchise just part of your company? So Tim, any thoughts on franchising a part of a company, maybe one particular division or one particular model?
Sure. If it is a business opportunity in its own right, and is branded, absolutely. So you could be. I'm just trying to think quickly what that could look like within an education business, but absolutely, there's no reason why you can't do that.
What about, Tim, if there was like a tuition delivery aspect, and then maybe they were publishing revision guides or something on the side?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could have those guides, that publishing side, but you could also have a tuition agency, if you like, on the other side, and you've proven that model out. You could franchise the agency part out quite easily.
So Enzo has actually just added to his question there. Could we franchise the courses, but not the tutor referral agency? I don't know if you've got anything else to add on to that. Sounds like it's a difficult way round to do it.
Yeah, possibly. I'd have to have probably a direct conversation with Enzo to fully understand exactly how that could be and what that model could look like.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Have we got any other questions for Tim? I've got to be honest, guys, this is a prime opportunity to ask questions to the genuine expert in this area. So if there's anything that's come to your mind, unless Tim's been so amazingly clear and insightful, you've had no need for further clarification.
I doubt I've been that clear, John, because as a franchise professional who talks to franchisors all the time, we're always questioning each other.
We have another question, Emily. Yep. From deciding to franchise to going with the first franchisee, is there an average timeline?
No.
What's an expected timeline?
No. But what I can tell you, Emily, is that it usually takes the longest amount of time to get your first franchisee on board, and once that happens, and you're then able to prove out the franchisee model and work directly with, very often your very early franchisees help you build out exactly what the franchisee model. So you've built out what your corporate model is. You've got all the systems in place and all the processes. Then the franchisee comes on board, and then the franchisee asks a couple of questions. But what about this? And what about, I hadn't quite thought of that. Maybe we just need to tweak this a little bit. So your early doors franchisees can be a real big asset and help in structuring and formulating exactly what the franchisee model looks like going forward. Quite often, your first franchisees can be just people that you know, or it could be somebody who comes along and has seen you just working this business incredibly and saying, "Can I have a bit of that, please? Could I become a franchisee?" It doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen. So the answer to your question is it can take quite a while to get to your first franchisee. Sometimes it just happens by default, but more often than not, you have decided to become a franchisor, and then it's a challenge to get can be a challenge to get your first one. Remember, your first franchisee, you're asking somebody to invest in a franchise which hasn't franchised yet. It's a lot easier for a franchisor who's got 20, 30, 40 franchisees to say, we have an established brand and franchise network, and you can talk to those franchisees about what the experience that they're having as a franchisee, and that makes it easier to bring on board your future franchisees. The early ones, especially the first one, can be the most difficult.
Wow, that's interesting. And do you ever see, Tim, just a sort of an aside to that question, do you ever see situations where someone's wanted to work with someone, or they have worked with someone, maybe as an employee or something, and then they've gone on to become a franchisee after that? Does that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I can, outside of the education sector, one that I came across very recently in the home care market, Radfield Home Care. I think they've got around about 40 franchisees at the moment, but one of their head office staff has become a franchisee. It happens quite regularly that employees become franchisees.
That's probably quite a good sign of a healthy franchise.
Absolutely. If an employee sees that the success that his employer is having, and the employer has said, I'm going to franchise this, then quite often an employee will say, do you know what? I'll give you £20,000 or whatever it is for this, because I can see how much money I can make, and I can also go make a difference in another territory.
Brilliant. Just on to the next question. So we've got a few questions here on the fees. I mean, this is an area that I think maybe there is a lot of mystique around sort of are there rules of thumb around sort of how those fee levels get set, both the fees to join the franchise and any ongoing fees for people that maybe don't know franchising models so well? What's the deal with that?
Yeah, so your initial franchise fee, there's no set rules for anything. There are franchises which are available for a few £1,000s, and there are franchises which are available for a few £100,000 as an initial fee. So there is an initial fee, and then there is, on top of that, there needs to be an allocation for working capital for the franchisees while they're getting their business up and running, and they're also, depending on the brand, there needs to be capital for a bricks and mortar center or office, and for some for fixtures and fittings as well. So your initial franchise fee is the fee which goes directly to the franchisor to buy the rights to operate the business model for the duration of the franchise agreement. Now, I'll go back to that in a second, but some people also think, when the franchise agreement comes to an end, do I have to pay that franchise fee again? The answer to that is no. In the vast majority of cases, there are renewal clauses within the franchise agreement. And so the franchisor will come to you a year in advance or whatever and say, you're coming up for renewal in a year. Can we sit down and talk about renewing? The initial franchise fee, as I say, can range from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands. In this sector, it can generally range from a few thousand to probably up to 30,000, depending on the brand and the type of business model that it is. So that's the initial franchise fee. Then there are what are known as ongoing fees. And these are, in the old days, were known as royalties. They're now widely known within the UK market as management service fees. And that's generally a percentage of monthly turnover. And that is used by the franchisor to provide support structures, marketing support, not necessarily marketing support, support structures, and head office personnel, and lots of other things around that, developing new products and services to sell in the future, as I spoke about. And that's normally set at around about 8% of your turnover. Now, it does depend on what services the franchisee is providing for the franchisees, what services the franchisor is providing for the franchisees. So, for example, I know of a franchise brand which does all invoicing, money collection, and lots of other services. They've taken it away, that responsibility, from the franchisee. But for that, they charge a 20% service management service fee. But a rule of thumb is around about 8%. There is then an additional fee of around about 2% normally, which goes into a brand marketing fund, which is a separate account, which is basically managed by the franchisor alongside the franchisees to decide what national brand marketing is done, whether that be Google AdWords, radio advertising, billboard advertising, press advertising, public relations, or whatever. But the marketing fund, the 2% marketing fund, is to drive national marketing campaigns. I hope that helps, John.
Yeah, I think that's really, really clear. Thanks very much, Tim. That's taken a lot of the mystery out of franchise pricing, I think.
Yeah.
Right, just going down the questions. So, question for you, Tim. How do you work with businesses to become franchisable? I suppose, please, it's got Pinnacle franchisee growth experts down there. Please explain what Pinnacle does.
Yeah,
How
so
does it?
no, absolutely. So as I mentioned right at the top of the presentation, I work now with franchisors who have identified or want to identify their top performing franchisees, those ones who have generally broken through the ceiling of what the franchisor thought their business model was, and help those franchisees become even more successful. And that takes on many forms. That can be working with them in a vertical structure to maximize the opportunity within their local territory. It could be to work with them to expand their business, to purchase more territories from the franchisor, to expand in exactly the same business but over a wider geography. Or it could be to work at multiple brands, and it could be working with franchisees who want to work multiple brands in the same sector. So in this case, education, or it could be to work with franchisees who want to diversify and have brands within the education sector and maybe in the home care sector as well. And let me tell you, multi-brand and multi-unit is becoming a much bigger thing here in the UK as it's following the US model. So just as an example, I had the privilege of sitting on a discussion table last week in Phoenix with a multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee in his mid-40s. Him and his brother owned 50 franchise units. Around about 50% of those franchise units were in the hair styling sector, and the other 50% were in home services. If my memory serves me correctly, it was carpet cleaning. It was a brand in carpet cleaning. He'd started off in pizza takeaway business, a brand called Little Caesars. And he's expanded his business. He sold the Little Caesars pizzas, and he's now expanded into 2 brands, but 50 units, him and his brother. Very big business.
Oh, wow. I can imagine. I imagine that's turning over quite a hefty amount in the US.
Yeah, exactly. This is starting to become a thing in the UK as well. So, and it's entirely possible within the education sector. So it's helping people open their minds to what is indeed possible. At the annual National Franchise Awards late last year, the Franchisee of the Year award was given to a franchisee which is owned by a family who have multiple. They are in the restaurant sector, but they turn over 185 million pounds a year. So, and it doesn't, multiple unit, multiple brand does not have to be just in the restaurant business or the quick service restaurant business, as I illustrated with this guy that I spoke to last week. He was in the hairstyling and home services industry. It's quite possible in education as well.
Yeah, well, fascinating. Well, we've just got to the end of this Spotlight series. Absolutely fascinating and a real delight to have you, Tim. Enormous wealth of knowledge and experience you've got in all aspects of franchising, and I can't recommend you highly enough with regard to that. If you do have questions for Tim, how can the people get hold of you, Tim, if they want to sort of have a further chat?
Sure. I haven't put my email address on this slide, but and it's quite a long one. But if you've got those words at the bottom of this screen there, franchisee growth experts, that's part of the email address. So it's tim@franchiseegrowthexperts.com. Yeah, just send me an email, or indeed if you forget that or you lose it and you want to have a question, just speak to anybody at the TTA and they'll pass on my details.
Yeah, if you can contact info@thetutorsassociation.org.uk, we can happily put you in touch with Tim if you're struggling. Well, yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, thanks very much, Tim. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much to everybody else who's attended. Very well attended session today, and we look forward to hearing stories about people moving on to bigger and exciting things in the near future.